guys, welcome back. So today I want to talk about shooting 40 Smith & Wesson in 10mm firearms. Now I'm not telling you to do this. I'm not saying it's safe or right or proper or that it even should be done. It's just something that I've done in the past because I've always liked 10mm, and there was a time when 10mm was kind of the unwanted stepchild of the firearms community, and the only ammunition you could find was 40 Smith & Wesson. So I grabbed a box of 40 Smith & Wesson and tried firing it in some of my 10mm self-loading pistols, and sure enough, it worked just fine. Now, some people will tell you that it's unsafe and things like that, and it very well may be. How that is, I don't know, but I've shot an awful lot of it that way and never had a problem. So last year we made a video about a 10mm revolver. I'm a 10mm Filometer, same thing. 10mm fan, and I just wanted a 10mm revolver. And does it make a whole lot of sense? Why not get to a 357 Magnum? I understand those arguments, and a 357 Magnum probably is more practical. I love 10mm, but there are times when you want to shoot 40 Smith & Wesson in a 10mm because it's either easier to find or maybe more affordable. Now what I have here is a 40 Smith & Wesson round. It's an American Eagle from Federal Ammunition, and Federal did send us this ammunition for free. And we chose to use the Syntech brand because it has a red projectile, so it'll stand out as compared to the 10mm that we've brought out this afternoon, which I have a single round of here, which you can see is notably longer than the 40 Smith & Wesson. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start off the video is fire some 40 Smith & Wesson out of this Ruger 1911. It's an SR 1911 in 10mm. And I'm going to fire the 40 Smith & Wesson out of it. Then we're going to jump over to my Ruger 10mm revolver and do a little bit of testing with 40 Smith & Wesson. Now, why am I doing that testing? Well, when we did the video last year on the revolver, I said I wanted the revolver in 10mm so I could shoot 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells. To my knowledge, nobody makes shot shells in 10mm. So I hadn't picked up any 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells at the time of filming, but that's why I had picked up the gun, just automatically assuming I would be able to do with a revolver what I had done with automatics for years. Well, some folks out there on the interwebs had written blog posts saying that there's folks out there in social media spreading misinformation about 10mm revolvers and why you can't shoot 40 Smith & Wesson in it. And I was like, oh, darn, I didn't even try it. I was waiting on 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells and didn't even think to go pick up a box of 40 Smith & Wesson just ball ammunition when we made the video, and I don't want to spread misinformation. So what we're going to do in this video is try to set the record straight. We brought out the revolver, we brought out some 40 Smith & Wesson, some shot shells, some ball rounds, and we're just going to test it in real time with you guys and see what happens for us. But based upon what I've read online, it's not going to work. So let's see what actually happens. But meanwhile, I'm going to show you that, at least with all my 10mm autos I own, I regularly shoot 40 Smith & Wesson through them. Used to, not so much anymore now that 10mm is back in vogue. But I'm just going to show you this works here really quick. 8 rounds loaded up. Locks open and everything. All right, now how is that working? Because the shell's so much shorter, well, it's just popping the rim up under the extractor. The extractor's holding it against the breech face so the firing pin can make contact. All right, so let's grab the revolver and see what happens with some 40 Smith & Wesson ball rounds and shot shells using half moon clips, or full moon clips, I should say. This is my GP100 Ruger in 10mm, and this is a 40 Smith & Wesson, or you can call it a 40 short and wimpy or short and weak, whatever you want to call it. They call it that because it's a shortened version of a 10mm. And 10mm revolvers, headspace off the neck of the case, so when you drop them in, they disappear into the cylinder, and there's no way you're ever going to get that to fire because that primer's not up against the breech face of the frame here, so the firing pin's never going to make contact with that primer. So that's not going to work. So that's why you use half moon clips. Darn it, I keep saying half moon clips. I'm an old fart. Full moon clips. Full moon means you get 6 rounds into one. Half moon means 3 and 3. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in using 40 Smith & Wesson. We got those nice red bullets there to indicate 40 Smith & Wesson. All right, there they are inside there. Now, I read a blog post showing that the Ruger half moon clips won't work because they're slightly thinner than some aftermarket clips. And yes, they are clips. All right, let's see what happens. 6 shots of 40 Smith & Wesson. All right. That worked, surprisingly. Based upon what I read, that shouldn't work. I'll try some shot shells next. There's a foamy in my pocket. All right, there's a foamy on the ground. Go ahead, again, 40 Smith & Wesson. You can see they're nice and short. Drop them in there using the Ruger full moon clips. All right, I only brought 2 clips out with the gun, so that works just fine, guys. Let's see what happens with the shot shells, and we'll shoot some more. We brought out several hundred rounds. Let's see if we get any failures at all. Now, with 10 millimeter, you can see these are much longer. And these, when you drop them into the cylinder, stick out, unlike the 40s, which just drop all the way down in there. And you don't need the moon clip for proper ignition. Now, the moon clip will allow you to eject them, because the hand ejector does not work when you do this, because this is a rimless cartridge. There's nothing for the ejector to work off of. But the 10 millimeter will work just fine out of this pistol, no matter what. Woo! That's a heck of a lot warmer than those 40 Smith & Wessons. Oh man, I love 10 millimeter. All right, well, let's load up some of those shot shells and see what happens, and we'll shoot some more of the Federal Syntech and see if we have any issues with that. We may have brought out some other ball ammo as well, just to see if we have different ammunition give us problems shooting the 40 Smith & Wesson out of this GP100. Here we have some CCI 40 short and wimpy shot shells. All right, this is what they look like. And we're going to see if they're going to work in the gun, because this is originally one of the reasons I wanted a 10 millimeter revolver, so I could shoot some of the 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells. Never done it before. You guys are watching me in real time right now, learning with you. You can see the shot shells, drop them in there. These very well may not fire. Based upon what I've read on the internet, let's see what happens. The gun did just seize up on me. Oh, wow. So here's one thing that you'll learn about aluminum cases. Aluminum cases expand and contract at a different rate than brass or even steel, and sometimes they'll bind up, and that's exactly what's happened here. So for those of you guys that say revolvers never fail, this one just did. Okay, so I couldn't pull the trigger because that case backed out for whatever reason, and I was pulling on the trigger. Holy cow, I can't get that back in there. So that split the case, and I think that's what's causing our problems. So it's not a problem of ignition with the in the case of the shot shell. All that happened, it wasn't the aluminum expanding, and well, it kind of was. What it looks like happened is it split the case, it expanded into the chamber, split the case, and then pushed back under recoil. But because it split, that split held this case back against the breech face, which caused enough friction to keep me from firing the gun. So it failed, but not for the reason that I was told by the internet. Let's see if it'll fire any more of them, and if we get the same type of failure. And again, same type of failure. I cannot pull that trigger hard enough to get it to go to the next round, so holy cow. Sorry, my knife sheath is sticking out. I'm not going to shoot any more of these guys, because there we go, because I can't get this out now. But once I get it open, it doesn't stick anymore, but you can see that split case once again. So 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells are not going to work in this revolver. But once again, not for the reasons that I was told by the internet for failure of ignition. It's for a completely different reason, which actually makes sense now that I think about it. All right, I'm a glutton for punishment. We'll do it one more time. That's weird. It's causing it to hang up, and the trigger's really hard to pull, but for those last ones after I took, now the cylinder's kind of sticking again. But that's not reliable enough for me. So there you guys go. We're going to shoot some more ball rounds, but even the shot shells, we have 100% ignition, even though I had read, and I'll post the link to the blog that wrote the article talking about why this won't work. And I'm not doubting the results they had. I'm not saying every revolver that's in 10 millimeter will give you the same results as my GP100, but right now my GP100 has had 0 ignition failures because of using 40 Smith & Wesson, which is what I was told would happen. And I believed until I got out here and just learned something to the contrary. All right, very interesting results. And it sucks that I can't shoot shot shells out of my 10 millimeter. Oh well. So I know what the next question is going to be, and it's a valid question. What happens if you try to shoot 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells out of a 10 millimeter automatic? I have 3 rounds loaded. Let's go ahead and see what the pistol does. Malfunction. You can see the split case. And a stovepipe failure. Now, we did not bring out a 40 Smith & Wesson handgun to demonstrate whether or not these work out of the 40 Smith & Wesson. This is strictly a 10 millimeter video, but as you can see, the 40 Smith & Wesson shot shells are not going to cycle the action of the 10 millimeter automatic pistol like the ball rounds will. So, another data point. We fired 100 rounds of the Syntech Federal 40 Smith & Wesson ammunition out of the GP100 revolver, and we had 0 issues, no failures to fire whatsoever, using the Ruger supplied full moon clips. Now we're going to fire the last 5 rounds of the Syntech, and then I'm going to fire 6 rounds of this Federal RTP, which is Range Target Practice 40 Smith & Wesson ammunition. All right, so we're going to see if this works out of the gun as well, which is just a different flavor of 40. Let's find my partial. So in the last 5 rounds on a 6-round moon clip of the Syntech. Let's go ahead and load that into the gun. So here goes the last of 100 rounds of the Syntech. All right. Let's see if that regular old range ammo, which has some corrosion on it, picked this up at a local gun shop. 40 Smith & Wesson, you can see it's nice and short. Drop it in there and see if this stuff fires. So that was 6 rounds of the other flavor of Federal 40 Smith & Wesson, and once again we had 0 failures to fire. So you can see they're getting nice solid hits on the primers. So it's you know, it's not kind of igniting them, it's definitely igniting them. So I can't say that I can mimic the tests that others have conducted with 40 Smith & Wesson out of 10mm revolvers. Again, my only 10mm revolvers are Rugers, so take it for what it's worth. I'm gonna do some more shooting with the Federal ball ammunition, the non-Syntech, and just see what happens. See if, you know, after a box, 50 rounds, if we have any failures to ignite. That's all we can do, or testing-wise, guys. Right now, we're shooting 40 Smith & Wesson out of a 10mm revolver with no issues whatsoever. Another question would be, how does the 40 Smith & Wesson compare to the 10mm in terms of accuracy when you're shooting a 40 Smith & Wesson out of a 10mm? Does it negatively affect the accuracy? Well, let's find out. This is the 40 Smith & Wesson. We'll shoot the 10mm last. 7 yards from our target. Go ahead and load the short and wimpy in there, and let's just fire off 6 rounds at the number 1. All right, so if it's negatively affecting the accuracy, I'm not seeing it, at least. All right, let's try the 10mm and see what we get. Can't imagine much better than that. Only worse. Shoot at number 2. Well, if anything, I did better with the 40 short and wimpy. So in terms of accuracy, we've been out here shooting it, doing some groups, and we're not really seeing much of a difference at all. So there you go. With the aluminum cased shot shell, we were getting the splits in the case, and that's because of the length of the shell once it fires. They fold the end of the case over to simulate a bullet, so it'll feed. So it gives it extra length once it fires and expands, and that's what's causing it to stick. So you're probably going to ask yourself, well, what about brass cased ammunition? So we took a look at the 100 cases, or actually over 100 cases, of the 40 Smith & Wesson that we fired, and there are no signs of any types of cracking, splitting, or any types of case failures whatsoever. And we've examined pretty much all of them. So in that regard, there doesn't seem to be any detriment to the case itself, or any signs of overpressure or case head separation or splits in the case that may cause a dangerous situation for the shooter out of the revolver. But again, I'm not saying go out and do what we're doing here this afternoon. I'm just showing you what we're experiencing and giving you that data. So will the 9mm shot shells cycle the 43X that I'm carrying today? Inquiring minds want to know. We have 5 rounds of the shot shells in here from CCI. Let's see if they cycle the 9mm pistol. Almost tried to kick that one out. All right, so on the last 2 rounds, we got one to actually cycle, and that's because the magazine spring pressure has been reduced. But with 5 rounds in there, they weren't cycling the gun. The closer we got to the end of the magazine, they actually cycled the action. So generally speaking, I've never had shot shell cycle automatic pistols either. They're kind of sort of one of those things you have to cycle manually. So keep that in mind. Here goes another 6 rounds of the Federal 40 Smith & Wesson. See if Jason can get a shot of the head stamp. I want to prove to you guys that we're not playing around here. Okay, and then I'm going to take out a 10 millimeter and show you guys the length difference. Here's a 10 millimeter next to the ones we're about to shoot. So you can see the 10 millimeter is actually longer. Okay, so we're shooting 40 Smith & Wesson. Dropping 40 Smith & Wesson. Now, of course, some of you guys are going to say, well, what does this do to the gun? How does this damage the 10 millimeter revolver? Because the bullet is setting back away from the shoulder cut inside the cylinder. Is it doing any extra damage to the cylinder or anything like that? I don't know. All I know is people have been shooting 38 specials out of 357 Magnums for decades. People have been shooting 44 special out of 44 Magnums for decades. So me shooting 40 Smith & Wesson out of a 10 millimeter, it's going to cause the same type of damage that would have already occurred in a 38/357 or a 44 special or whatever. So I don't see it causing a major problem, especially if you don't do it regularly. You just do it when you can't find 10 millimeter ammunition, or if you just want to save a few bucks. All right, 6 rounds of 40. I will say that the 40 has noticeably less recoil than the 10 millimeter. Again, 40 Smith & Wesson. 10 millimeter is a little bit stouter. All right, there we go. So we have had 0 failures to ignite with the 40 Smith & Wesson out of the 10 millimeter revolver using 3 different types of ammunition, because even the shot shells ignited. They failed for a different reason, thus making the shot shell 40 Smith & Wesson out of a 10 millimeter revolver a no-go, but not because of ignition failure, using all Ruger components. So take from this video what you will. It's video evidence. You don't have to take my word for it. We've obviously done everything we can to be fair in this assessment. Only thing I can do now is try some other 10 millimeter revolver. I don't even know if anybody makes a 10 millimeter revolver besides a Ruger, to be honest with you. Guys, if you'd like to support us here at the channel, the best way to do that is to become a Patreon supporter. There is a link down below. Please follow that link and consider directly supporting us here at the channel. We take no industry money. That's how we can be brutally honest in our assessment of various products and accessories and stuff like that that's on the market out there through your support. Also, if you'd like to support us, pick up a t-shirt from our Forged from Freedom store. We have tons of cool t-shirts and hoodies and sweaters out there. Link down below. And also consider supporting us by swinging by shopping at Copper Custom, which is our online store. And last but not least, yes, we are Twitch gamers. And if you'd like to see us play Battlefield 4, Battlefield 5, and stuff like that, there's a link down below. Go by our Twitch channel and check it out. Guys, thanks for 11 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon.